Welcome to Level Up Tribes. Level Up Tribes provides resources to help you attain the necessary resources to level up your mind, body, and soul and realize your full potential. It is about exploring, learning, providing you with the tools from the experts for you to create a better version of yourself. I am your host, Agnes Goodwine, and welcome, Tribes. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Agnes, how in the world are you today?
I'm good, and you?
I'm doing great. I am doing great. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Let me change my name down here since my wife's not going to really join us today.
Oh, and I was getting excited.
Well, you would be. She's quite a lady. She's going to be retiring in about, what's today, the 17th? She's going to retire. 30th is her last day at work.
Oh, my God.
She is the controller of the state of North Carolina.
Good for her.
He runs the big part of the state finances, and she has about 200 people that work for her in Raleigh at the Capitol. And she's been working now in her life for 60 years. The day she turned 16 years old, she got her driver's license, of course, like most people. The first thing you do, right? Go to the driver's, and got my driver's license. And then she drove the car to downtown Lenoir, North Carolina. This was in the summer. Her birthday is the 29th of June. So she drove to downtown to get her a job.
Yeah.
And she landed her first job in an insurance agency and impressed the president of the company and started work. And she has been working ever since. 60 years that she has been working at one job or another. And her last job is the controller of the state of North Carolina. So
Amazing.
we're looking at a big celebration here for her to finally, and she's retired seemingly about 3 or 4 times, but she could never quite make it stick. But I think this time we're going to make it stick. So we'll see. So we're happy about the upcoming next couple of weeks. Freedom at last.
Yes, I actually just finished a podcast with a financial advisor, and we spoke about retirement. Yeah, it's something to look forward to. You know, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, everybody is. I remember when I was a young man, it was planning for your retirement was something that you really had better do. And luckily we did, and we had good advice, but you can never start planning for your retirement too early. I mean, the earlier you start, the better you're going to be. I remember in college learning the principle of compound interest. You probably remember the first time you learned about how you could take 6% interest or whatever, 10% interest, and you keep adding it up and adding it up and adding it compounds. And whoa, you start out with whatever, and 10 years later, wow, it's 2.5 times or whatever it is what you started out with. Well, those concepts, you better stick with you, because these young people today, assuming they have enough income to put some away, and that's getting harder and harder to do with inflation eating away at everything that we have. But, you put something away every year, starting at age 22 or whenever you start your career, by the time you're 60, 65, 70, whatever, you'll have a fair amount of money there to retire off of. So
Yes.
But you can't wait. You can't start at age 60 and expect to catch up the last 40 years of your life. You got to start early.
So do you have big plans for the summer after she retires?
We don't have anything set in concrete, except that we know we're going to go and visit relatives and friends that live further away that we have not seen. And, the pandemic really, I'm sure you experienced it too. There were places and relatives that you just couldn't go see because it wasn't safe.
Yeah.
We're going to do some visiting and with friends and relatives and do a whole lot of catching up, hopefully, with people.
Well, good for you. I'm excited for both of you.
So anyway, we're having a very hot day. We're getting some Arizona heat today. It is, on my watch, it says it's 97 degrees here. Now that's hot for North Carolina, and we got some humidity. You go outside, you better prepare to do some sweating, because it won't take you long.
Yes, that's hot. I lived in Georgia for 16 years. And my husband's sister lives in North Carolina. So we're very much aware of the humidity and heat.
Yeah.
Here, the dangers of Phoenix heat is that there's no humidity, so you're not sweating.
Right.
And so you have to keep hydrating your body.
Yeah, you better have your bottle of water around with you all the time. That's right.
Well, I love the fact that you're from North Carolina. One thing that I miss the most before we get into our interview is I miss the Southern accent.
Well, you're going to get a dose of it today. In fact, if you go buy my book on Audible, you can listen to my Southern accent for eight hours. I'll read the book to you. Oh, Maeve.
Oh man, I love it. I love it. I miss the Southern hospitality. I miss the people. So when I saw that you were from there, I'm like, I know I'm going to get that today. So thank you
Very
for
good.
it. Thank you again for being at Level Up Tribes podcast. It is an honor to have you on the show. I can't wait to dive deep into your story and your services to the world, really. And so today I have Dave Combs. He's a songwriter, author. He's a native of Irwin, Tennessee. They grew up in a family that enjoyed making music. Both of his parents and his grandmother also played. Combs played the piano, which began his musical journey that included being a church choir director and a pianist. After college, they moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where he served as minister of music at a church while working as a computer programmer at a Fortune 500 company. His songwriting began with the now popular standard Rachel's Song, which was arranged and recorded by Gary Prim in 1986?
Yes, 1986.
So that's kind of where I want to start our interview today. I
Okay.
want like for you to tell us about that night in Nashville where this story began, pretty much.
Pretty much. And, the song for anybody that's ever written a song or even thought about a song and dreamed up one, and I don't mean a professional songwriter in Nashville. Almost a lot of people, I understand my grandpa Price used to whistle a song when he was out in the fields tending his tobacco fields, and I'd love to know what that song was, but I'll bet you my grandpa probably whistled a song that he made up himself. Now, wouldn't you just love to know what that was? So a lot of people write songs, and the thing is, what do you do with them? Do you keep them to yourself? Well, with today's technology, you can do lots of things with a song, but the thing that I did with mine was I took the song that I had written, just a simple tune on the piano, that I eventually, 2 years later after writing it, got it. I played it at a christening service for our godchild, Rachel, and named it after her. After I played it, I said, we're going to call this song Rachel's Song in your honor. And she was in the little baby in her mother's arms. So that was how it got its name. And then in 1986, that's the point that you would want to start. And that is when I was working with Western Electric, AT&T, in Nashville, Tennessee, in my day job. And my wife, Linda, says, Dave, why don't you, while you're in Nashville, get a demo recording professionally made of Rachel's Song? And anybody can do this. You can hire a musician in Nashville and they'll record a demo of a song that you write. Now, you have to pay for it, of course, and it's not a ton of money, but, it's not cheap either. But you can get a professional recording made of a song. So I said, okay, that's a great idea. So one evening after work, I was driving around downtown Nashville, Tennessee, looking for a studio and somebody to talk to about recording a demo. So I'm going in this part of town called, affectionately known as Music Square. It's about like 2 square block areas that everything in it is music. The Country Music Hall of Fame is there, the BMI and ASCAP headquarters are there, and the old RCA recording studios that you can go. They give tours of the studio now. It's in there. And so I'm driving down this back side street called Roy Acuff Place. Now, Roy Acuff, those of you that are Grand Ole Opry fans will remember that he was a famous musician in Nashville, Tennessee. Everybody loved Roy Acuff, and they named a street after him. So I'm driving down this little side street, Roy Acuff Place, and at the end of the street is a building that has a barn-shaped roof to it, and on the street corner is this great big water wheel. It really came from an old mill someplace. And on the side of the building, it says, the Music Mill. And I thought, well, okay. So I pull in the gravel parking lot, sit and park, and I look through the glass door. Oh, there's a man sitting at a desk in the lobby. Okay. So I go over and knock on the door, and he comes up and unlocks the door and opens it. And he says, Hi, I'm George Clinton. Can I help you? Now, Agnes, it's a different George Clinton that I know. The first name that popped in your head.
Yes.
There's a lot of George Clintons around, but
Yes.
this George Clinton was a recording engineer in Nashville at this studio. And so he introduced himself, and I said, I've got a song I've written I'd love to get a demo made of, and I'm looking for a studio. And he says, well, come on in, Dave. So I step into the lobby, and it's a big 2-story lobby, and over on the left wall of the lobby is this giant life-size photograph of Glenn Campbell. And then right here in the middle, right over his desk, was a great big life-size picture, a panorama of the group Alabama. And over here is the Forrester Sisters, and then the rest of the walls were just plastered with gold records and platinum records and all kinds of accolades for the music that they were obviously recorded right in this place. So I was impressed, and I said, George, I have never stepped foot in a studio until now. And he says, well, you're in luck. There's nobody recording right now. I'll take you on a tour of this place. So, okay. He said, let's go into Studio A. You know, if they have more than one, A is always your showcase big studio. So let's go to Studio A. So we go in there, and he opens the door into this big room with, hardwood floors, and you could fit an orchestra in this room. It was a huge room, and in the back corner was this 9-foot black Steinway concert grand piano, and isolation rooms around for the vocalists or the drummers and that kind of thing. And wow, that was impressive enough. And he said, well, come on in. Let's go into the control room where the engineer works. I said, okay, show me all that. So he goes over and he opens this door. It's a soundproof door. It's about this thick, about 6 or 8 inches thick. Opens it up, and we go in this room. And the first thing I see is the console. It's a big table-looking thing with rows and rows and rows of sliders and knobs and switches, and it was an impressive console. I later found out it had like 32 tracks that it could keep up with, to record from. Impressive. And around the wall were these digital tape recorders and analog tape recorders and big speakers over the plate glass window, the soundproof window where you could look out into where the musicians were. And it was impressive. I said, George, you could launch a spaceship from in here, it looks like. And I said, how much does a place like this cost? And he says, well, Dave, it's $125 an hour plus engineer. Now, this was 1986. In today's dollars, that would be over $500 an hour.
Wow.
Plus engineer. So I guess he probably saw my face go, oh, no, I can't afford this. He said, Dave, don't worry about it. He says, there's lots of studios around, and the fellow who owns this studio owns a little tiny studio across the street. It's in what used to be a 2-bedroom house, and they've converted it into a studio. And he said, it's $15 an hour plus engineer. I thought, okay, now we're talking. So I said, George, what I need now is I need a musician that can arrange and perform the demo for me of my little song. It's just a little piano piece. Just need a good piano player. And he thought for a second. He said, I know just the person for you. He says his name is Gary Prim. He said, Gary's a young fella. He and I go to church together. I've known him forever, and he's a great piano player, a great session musician. Okay. He said, let's go back to my desk, and I'll look up his phone number for you. So he did, wrote it on a piece of paper and handed it to me. I go back out to my rental car, and I hightail it back to the airport, back to my hotel near the airport. And your audience is probably going to say, well, why didn't you call him on your cell phone? This was 1986. Cell phones had not been invented yet. The internet had not been invented yet. So I got to find my landline phone in the hotel room. So I go there and I call Gary Prim's number. I got his answering machine. He called me back within about 30 minutes. And he says, this is Gary Prim, can I help you? I said, I sure hope so. I said, George Clinton said you're a great piano player and would do a magnificent job doing a demo for me of a little song I've written called Rachel's Song. And he says, yeah, I'd be glad to do that. I said, well, what do you need from me? And he says, all I need is I need a recording of you playing it so I'll kind of know what it sounds like. And I need a lead sheet. I said, okay, what's a lead sheet?
Yeah.
I wasn't familiar with the lingo of the music business in Nashville. And he said, oh, it's just a piece of paper with the melody written out and the chords that go with it. Just a simple, notation of the song. And I said, oh, well, I've got that. This little piece of paper that I first wrote the song down on, and anybody watching this would see that it's just the notes on the piece of paper and the chords written down above it with my name at the top, copyright 1981, David M. Combs. And so that's a lead sheet. So I went home. I said, I've got that, Gary. So when I got home, I made a copy and mailed it to him along with a cassette tape of me playing it. And so he lined up the studio across the street, the little tiny studio where I was talking about. And on August the 22nd, 1986, at 6 o'clock in the evening, which is kind of a standard recording time. I learned later that the recording times in Nashville are 10, 2, 6, and 10. Those are the starting time. You take breaks in between those. So at 6 o'clock was the appointed time to meet Gary at this little studio on a Friday. So he comes walking in at 6 o'clock that evening, and I meet him for the very first time. Instant friends. He and I both, turns out, are from East Tennessee, not too far from each other. We both speak the same language. We speak Southern, and and so we just hit it off. Just a wonderful relationship. Well, he comes in with his synthesizer, and he proceeds over to the little baby grand piano to warm up on and get used to playing it. Sets his synthesizer down, of course. And then I go into the control room where the engineer is. This is a little tiny control room that has a small console and a smaller tape machine and so forth. But it's adequate for what we need. And there's a little glass window that we can look through that's soundproof to see Gary at the piano. And we can talk to him through a little microphone and speaker. So pretty soon, he motions to the engineer and said, I'm ready. So the engineer says, okay. So he gets everything, hits the record button, and he tells Gary through this little speaker, he said, we're rolling. And so Gary starts playing. And Agnes, this is the first time I'd ever seen heard anybody play my music but me. And it's quite a process when you create something and have a professional take it and make something unbelievably beautiful out of it. It's just really, it's like you walk up to a painter and say, would you paint me a little picture of this, that, and they come back and it's a beautiful big painting, whatever. It was that kind of an impression. So I'm sitting there listening to Gary play, and I am just absolutely amazed at the skill and beauty of what he's playing. Well, he gets mostly through it for the first time, and he stops and he said, engineer, let's rewind this back to the beginning, and I can do better than that. So rewind the tape back to the start, push record again. Gary plays it all the way through this time. Perfect. No mistakes at all. And I'm just blown away. And if he had stopped right there and that was the end of it as a piano solo, I would have been happy as I could be. But he says, he came in the control room, he says, now I'm not finished yet. He said, I've thought about this song and I've got some bigger plans for this to make it sound really fantastic. He said, I want to take the piano part and double the piano notes on an electric piano sound. So he's got his synthesizer there and he puts it on electric piano, and the engineer assigns 2 new tracks for that. Gary puts on his headset so he can listen to the original part he just played. So he's sitting there listening to the original part and plays the electric piano sound right on top of the notes that he just played. Not at the very beginning, but further into the song is where this starts. And so he played that and he nailed the notes, because this is not by any click track or anything, but you can't tell, but there's not but one instrument being played. He is that skillful at matching what he just played. He played it again perfectly. And he says, okay, this recording needs a little bottom and some top. So he says, let's put in some low strings, like a big bass string sound, and let's put in some high strings like violins or whatever. So we assigned 2 more tracks for the low strings, and he sits there and he records the low strings on the synthesizer, and then 2 more tracks, and he records the high strings, the violin sounds. And then he said, right in the middle of this, I think there needs to be some punch to some of these notes. He said, I want to put some horn sound in there, like a section of horns in an orchestra. Okay. So 2 more tracks, and he sits there and records the horn sound in just selected places.
Mm-hmm.
Then he's finished. So he comes into the control room and he said, all right, let's listen to it. So the engineer plays all those tracks together, and we're sitting there listening to it on the monitor speakers, and man, this sounds as good as anything I'd ever heard on the radio. I was just blown away. And so I said, that's fantastic. And so he said, well, I think I'm done. I said, okay, this is great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gary. And I wrote a check to him for his amount, and he got his synthesizer and he left. And I didn't know whether I would ever see that young man again or not, because this was just a one-off as far as I was concerned at this point. And I had no idea that young man that walked out that door, he and I would later go into the studio over 170 times to record more music. And we became just the closest of friends. I saw with him and his wife, Julie, and my wife, Linda, we're just as close as you can be. We're like family. Got to see his 2 wonderful kids grow up and become wonderful young adults. And it's just been a wonderful relationship. But it all started that night in August of 1986. And that recording launched my life, changed my life. I had no idea at the time what it was going to do. But I do remember saying to myself this, Agnes, as I got out of the studio with my cassette tape of the song that he had made for me, I played it in my car radio and over, and I kept saying to myself, this is it. Now, Agnes, I did not know what it was, but I knew that this was important. This was going to be a life changer for me. I had no idea how or why or anything, but I felt it in my body. It was just that impactful.
It's beautiful. I did get a chance to listen to it. It is a beautiful song. The instrumental music gives you is so soothing, and it relaxes the mind, right? It's so good for the body. So I wanted to ask you about, and there's been a lot of medical research about this, but I wanted to touch on what you did through the pandemic for the elderly care facilities. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I sure can. And all of us probably remember the time, those news stories that we saw on national news, where they would go and talk about these nursing homes and assisted living facilities that were all of a sudden locked down. And families were separated from their children from their parents. They would not allow them in to visit with their parents. And these elderly folks in these retirement facilities were really feeling extremely isolated. If anybody had any kind of anxiety about being alone, that just really put it in high gear. Well, my mother spent the last 2.5 years of her life near me in an assisted living facility, which I visited her every day until she passed away. And so I got very familiar with the facilities, the help, how they operate, and how important the activities directors are in terms of providing entertainment and just things to take people's minds off their troubles and give them something to enjoy. And music was always a huge part. My mother loved to go to the music programs that would come. She would get her little walker and go down that hallway, and she would not miss one of those. So I know how important that is. And all of a sudden to be saying, you can't even get out of your room. We'll slide the food under the door for you. We can't even come in and give it to you. That just had to be a tremendous, upsetting, stressful thing for people. Well, that hit me right in my heart, because I just knew how that was going to affect people. Yeah. So I said, okay, I know that my music is a soothing, peaceful, kind of a salve on a wound kind of music that calms people down, because I'd experienced it with my mom. I would come and do programs at her nursing home, and they loved it, and I knew that. So I said, okay, and I like my photography it's all peaceful landscapes, beautiful flowers, vistas from the parkway down and looking on the world from Blue Ridge Parkway, all those kind of ocean sunsets or sunrises at the beach, those kind of beautiful pictures. And if you're watching those kind of pictures and listening to soothing, relaxing music, it takes your mind off all the troubles that you're under with all the stress and strain. So I said, okay, I cannot sit here and let this go without me doing something. I have to take some action. I took my albums, I think I took 3 of them. And for each album, I played the entire album and put my photography on it for YouTube and played the whole thing through. And then I repeated it so that it would play for 6 to 7 hours. Because of these people at nursing homes, they don't have time to go over to a computer and restart something every 30 minutes and go over. It's always quit playing. Now I got to go start it up again. Mm-hmm. I knew they were busy because I had talked to several of them. Busy people and really under big stress. So I made these long playing videos with my music and photography, and I made it available on YouTube for free to these nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And the way I got it to them, I personally called initially over 200 facilities in the state of North Carolina myself. I would call and talk to the activities director, tell her or him what I had created, and tell them if they would like to have it, I would send them via email the links to where they could have access to it. Oh, they loved it. So I knew, and I started getting feedback from people how much that they appreciated that just that gesture and having that available. And so I said, okay, how many nursing homes and assisted living facilities are there in the entire country? Turns out at that time, 2.5 years ago, it was 45,000 around the country. Well, there's no way in the world I can call 45,000 places. So I got to figure out how can I get this to them, at least where they'll have access to it. I knew this, that for everything in this country, there is an association. There's an association for everything. Because I used to live in Alexandria, Virginia, and it's kind of the world capital of associations. Every other building is an association for blah, blah, blah. So, sure enough, there's an association for assisted living, there's an association for nursing homes, and there's one in each state, and there's a national. So I said, okay, now thanks to the internet now, I could get the phone numbers of all those associations, and I started calling, and I called, I think it was 66 associations, state and federal, talked to their person about putting the link to my YouTube. I told them what I was doing with the free YouTube videos. I wasn't trying to sell anything.
Yeah.
And I said, just put it in your newsletter, because their customers are the nursing homes and assisted living facilities in their states. So they subscribe, all of them subscribe to this, so they instantly could have access to spread the word. And they did. And so I got my links available to the entire country of all 45,000 facilities, where they could see my photography and hear my music and hopefully help provide some relief from all of this stress they were under.
Well, thank you for giving the world such a beautiful gift during, a tough time.
Well, I just felt like I would have, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do that. I had to do that. It was something that needed to be done, and I'm happy that I succeeded at it.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the laws of attraction?
I sure have. Jack Canfield is a good friend of mine, and as you well know, Jack Canfield is a great proponent of the law of attraction.
And when I was reading your story, that's why I wanted to begin your story in Nashville, because I'm like, it just sounds like that you called that to you, attracted the song, you attracted the people that made it happen.
And I feel that, I really feel strongly about that. What are the odds of me walking in and meeting George Clinton that night? And what are the odds of him being personal friends forever with Gary Prim? And what are the odds of me hooking up with Gary Prim, this fantastic piano player? And it just went on, the dots kept getting connected, and that attraction, it just like things were meant to be. And there, when I needed something, it would appear. And it's just people at BMI, I walk in the door at BMI, they introduced me to a young fella who helped me get set up with the intellectual property parts of my song. Well, this young fella that I met later on became one of the vice presidents of BMI. And he's retired now, and I've touched base with him last year. He's still doing great. But all these people were into my life just when I needed them. It really is, the laws of attraction are there. But another law that Jack talks about in his book, one of my favorite books is Jack's, called the Success Principles. I'm sure you've seen that one. He talks about what I like to really preach about, and that is action, taking action. When you have an idea, a vision, a concept of something, or you want to get something done, you have got to take action and move toward that goal. If you sit still, if you can sit in your car in a parking lot with the engine running and you can turn that steering wheel all day long, you're not going anywhere. Only if you're moving can you change your direction and guide your life. That's a principle that I'm a physics major, a minor, and a math major, so I have to apply some of those physics things to life, I guess.
I love it so much. I wanted to go back and talk about, for those, music lovers, listening in. I have no clue. I just like listening to music, but the going deep into writing a song and composing a song, no idea. Because my platform is about leveling up. If there's someone that's listening, they want to compose a song, what are those action step or process that they can start doing?
Well, I love your concept of leveling up because, I also like woodworking and, a carpenter, a carpenter's level is one of his major tools, right? When you're building something, you put that on there and you're going to make that layer of bricks that they're putting up. They put a level string across there and it's got to be level. Well, if something's not level, what does that mean? That means part of it needs to be brought up a little bit, right? Well, your life is kind of like that too. Part of your life may be in great shape, and when let's say you write a song, or you have an idea, you've been humming a song, and you don't even know how to write it down or anything. Well, you've got the song, well, that's got you way up here. The part that needs leveling up is what do? How do I get this song out of my head and onto a piece of paper or into some musician that they can do something with it? Well, that leveling up process is maybe finding you a musician. Maybe it's somebody in your community, or like I did, I went to Nashville, Tennessee and got somebody. But, there are tons of musicians around, and almost any musician that is really a very accomplished musician could listen to what you're humming or whatever and say, oh, I could write that down for you and begin. So you don't have to do it by yourself. But the leveling up process is, don't just keep it to yourself. You've got to take some action to get that other piece of it back up to where it needs to be so that you're level. Yeah, and I think that's the key, is don't try to do everything yourself and think that you have to know all about it before you take some action and move ahead. If it's a song in your head, hum it to somebody that's a musician and say, what can we do with this? And if they're some piano players are great at improvising, whatever, I'll bet you could probably hum it to somebody. You'd sit down at the piano and you wouldn't believe what you're hearing about your song. They can do something like that. It is amazing. So that's my advice, is just take action to level up whatever's low in your life, bring it up so that you can start raising yourself up and up and up.
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. You're leaving a beautiful legacy for your family, your grandchildren. You're still very active and very, now your wife is retiring, so you're, going to probably take some time off, but I'm pretty sure you're still going to have some projects coming up in the future. You're doing all these podcast interviews. What is your next project, your next big thing that you're working on?
Well, the big thing was to spend as much time as I could on these podcasts, spreading the word about my music and my book. Now, I wrote my book at the encouragement, of course. My wife said, you've been talking about writing a book for years. The pandemic was the time to write it. So I did. It took me about 9 months last year, from January to September, to write it and get it published, but I did. And once I've gotten the book written down, now it's mainly the stories that I'm telling you today all of them are in the book, along with a lot more. But the purpose was to put it down so that those stories would not be lost. I'm told by people that have read it that those stories are inspirational. So I want people to be inspired by my stories. And I also want them to go and listen to my music. And as you and I have already talked about, how calming, there's medical studies that talk about how music, instrumental music, that's soothing, slow, calming music, can have a real calming effect on your physical body. And I personally know this because I also have a I went to my physical recently, and my doctor says, "Hey, Dave, your blood pressure is borderline up here. You need to think about lowering your blood pressure a little bit." And I said, "Well, Doc, I'm not going to take any medication. I think I can find ways to reduce my blood pressure without doing that." And I've been doing a lot of studying on I have another person that I met through a podcast. His name is Stephen Porges. He's a doctor who invented the heart rate variability measure that all the medical folks use. Now, he is an expert on the vagus nerve.
Yes.
Now, polyvagal theory is his book. He is the guru of polyvagal theory. And I've been reading a lot of his medical journal articles, and I know from reading from what he's discovered, the connection between your breathing, which as a yoga teacher, I'm sure I've never done yoga, but I know now that breathing has a lot to do with your heart rate. If you do slow breathing, your heart rate's going to go down. And also, he has discovered there's a connection between the rhythm of your breathing and the rhythm of your heart. As it slows down, it triggers your blood vessels to say, "Hey, relax, just relax." And guess what happens when your blood vessels relax? They get a little bit bigger. The blood flows through them easier. Your blood pressure goes down. Well, I bought a device that's the only FDA-approved device called a Resp-E-Rate. It's it's not cheap. It's like $300, $200 or $300, but it's a box that basically does probably what you do in person in yoga, that it trains you to take wherever you're breathing and slow it down, and to where I'll start out at 12 or 14 breaths a minute. And in about a minute, it will have my breathing rate down to about 5 or 6 times a minute, which is a very slow out, slow in. And after I finish that, I take my blood pressure. And I started keeping records 3 weeks ago. I've only been doing this 3 weeks.
Okay.
And my chart of my blood pressure goes doop, 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 doop. And it's not a momentary thing. After about 2 or 3 weeks of doing this exercise, and I'm sure you can attest to this with your yoga students, after you've done this a long time, it has a lasting, permanent effect on your heart rate and your blood pressure and your stress level. And so I am a firm believer. And people have told me for years, I've gotten over 50,000 letters from people about my music over the years, 40 years, 50,000. Many of them told me that my music helped them reduce the stress and helped them through all these troubling situations. And I never really knew the scientific connection between my music and their results or whatever. But now I'm beginning to understand that.
Yeah.
And it's powerful. It is very powerful.
It is so powerful. I mean, this can be an hour-long interview just to talk about the music and mindfulness and wellness. Just thank you so much for inspiring us, for giving such a beautiful melody to the world. Is there anything else you would like to add or discuss that perhaps we didn't touch on today?
Well, the only thing that I would like to conclude with, of course, is I want to make sure everybody knows that when you go to my website, combsmusic.com, for free, there's no fee for it or anything, in the middle of my website, it just simply says, a button there, it says play Rachel's song. And over at the right, there's a ... If you click on that, you can actually download the MP3 file for free and keep it on your phone or your laptop or tablet or whatever. But listen to Rachel's song. And my point is, I want you now to listen to it with the thought in mind, and close your eyes and go back to that studio with me that night in 1986. And now that I've told you what happened, I want you to imagine a movie in your mind. You're sitting there listening to that music. I want you to see Gary playing that, see him playing the synthesizer, and hear those horns and hear the strings and hear the electric piano cut in. And I think you'll be taken away right into that studio and enjoy it immensely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Agnes. It's been a pleasure. You're right. We could have talked all day long here, but we may have to have a part 2 sometime.
I'll give you a break. Enjoy Linda's retirement for a couple of months, right?
Okay. All right. Now, she's one that you would love to talk with too.
I would love it.
if you think my career has been interesting, my goodness, she's got 5 U.S. Senate confirmed jobs. She has our stairwell up to the upstairs is lined with 5 not diploma, they're certificates signed by the president 5 different times for her appointments to the executive positions in Washington. And
Good for her.
she is an unbelievable person. I like to brag on her because she is the kind of person with people and leadership and mentoring young people and leading people. Her leadership skills are just off the charts. And
Sounds like a lovely lady.
She absolutely is. So
you guys been married how long?
52 years next week.
Wow.
52 years ago. 1969 is when I met her, and 1970 is when we got married.
Yeah. How did you guys meet?
We were living in the same town here in Winston-Salem. She was a school teacher. She taught 6th grade, and I was working, of course, at Western Electric. And I was living in a singles-only apartment complex back when they had such a thing. And so I had met a lot of people, and I had met a couple of girls that lived in the same complex. And one weekend, it was Labor Day weekend, 1969. And I remember going home to Tennessee to see my mom. And on Sunday when I came back, or actually it was Monday when I came back from Tennessee, I stopped through in Kingsport, Tennessee at a stereo store and bought me 2 new big speakers. Back when you're young and you're building up your stereo equipment and all this. Today you just get the earbuds or whatever, but back then it was big stereo speakers were the thing. So I still remember, Fisher XP7B speakers. And they were like $99 a piece. Now, considering I only made $800 a month back then, that was a lot of money. So I bought those 2 speakers, brought them to Winston-Salem and hooked them up. Oh, it sounded great. And of course, back then, I didn't want to listen to music by myself. So I called up my 2 girlfriends that lived in the apartment. I said, "Hey, Susan, Shirley, y'all doing anything tonight?" "Oh, no, not really." I said, "Well, how about bringing some records, 40, the LP records. Bring some of your music, bring it over. I got a new set of speakers. Let's listen to some music tonight. How about it?" "Okay." And they said, "Well, we will if we can bring somebody." I said, "Okay, we got somebody visiting." I said, "Well, come on, the more the merrier." So at 6 o'clock, it seemed like everything happens at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, Susan and Shirley show up at my door, and there's this other beautiful young lady with them. And they said, "Well, this is Linda Morrison." And I said, "Oh, well, nice to meet you. Come on in." So the 3 girls come in, and we sat there, and we listened to records from, I guess it was 6 o'clock until I think it was 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And we talked and we talked and we talked. And the more I talked to this young new friend, Linda Morrison, the more we found out we had in common. I mean, we both played the piano for church. We both were Baptists. We had, everything was in common. And so I thought, wow, this is amazing. And one of the things we talked about was where to go to have a good meal and enjoy some music. And they knew about Susan and Shirley and Linda knew about this place called the Polly Rosa, it was named after Polly and Rose, which were 2 old ladies out in the countryside here that owned a farm. And in their farmhouse on Friday nights, they would have what we could call a jam session. Neighbors would come in, bring their guitars and whatever instruments they play, fiddle and whatever, and make music. And they'd get together for supper. I'll bring a bowl of corn, you bring some green beans, and bring the food, and we'll just have a great meal together and eat, and then we'll make music. Well, that grew. People came from miles around to this place, and they renamed the place Polly Rosa in honor of Polly and Rose. And so these girls had been there, and they said, "Dave, you got to go. Let's go this Friday. How about this Friday night?" And I said, "Okay." And so we arranged for the time. And mysteriously, by Friday, Susan and Shirley couldn't go for some reason. Yeah, you know what the story was there. Yeah, they had connived. Said they saw how this Linda Morrison and Dave kind of started getting an attraction there. So that was my first date with my sweet bride Linda. And so we went to the Polly Rosa. And the interesting story is when we got there Friday night, this was, for some reason, nobody showed up but me and Linda and the families that were there. There was no outside, visitors coming in. So we ate our meal and whatever, and then we went over into the music room where we were going to make some music. The piano player didn't show up that night. They had an old upright piano, and the piano player didn't show up. So I said, well, I'll play. So I went up on the stage and with the other two musicians or whatever, and we made music together that night. And my wife sat down there on the front row with Slick Ryerson, the owner of the place, and they had a big conversation, and we made music. And so that was my first date with Linda.
Wow.
And 35 years later, on Labor, and it was an anniversary, on Labor Day, 35 years later, Linda and I said, we're going to go back to the Polyrosa. We're going to repeat that first date 35 years later. So we go in the car and we get up to the Polyrosa, and this time the place is big. I mean, they've added on a big music hall room and a lot of people there. Parking lot was full. So we go in, pay it used to be $5 to get your meal. I think it was 12 or 15 now, but at that time. So we go in, get our wonderful country ham and biscuits and gravy and all the trimmings, all that good Southern cooking. And so we eat, and then it's time for the band to start playing and making music. And they had a big dance floor out there where people could do dancing if they wanted to. And they had, somebody play the guitar and sing, and the piano was sitting over there. They got ready to play. The piano player didn't show up. You know what happened? I got to go up on the stage again, and I played the piano with the band 35 years later.
Oh my God, Dave.
Isn't that just a wonderful story? It just warms my heart every time I tell it because it's such a wonderful memory. Yeah.
Talk about law of attraction.
That was one, wasn't it?
Yeah. I love it. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. I laughed. So thank you so much.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Agnes. You're such a delightful person. I love your personality, your smile, and I hope that your listeners just thoroughly enjoy this episode and get lots of accolades and lots of great feedback.
Thank you for listening. Please visit the website at www.leveluptribes.com. And please subscribe to the podcast and share with your family and friends. Be sure to tune in to our next episode. Catch you all next time, my beloved tribes.